Sure liked Mr. Woodard's analogy of the hypothalamus speaking pituitary. So the information is coming from the brain, needs to get to the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus takes that information, speaks pituitary, is able to tell the pituitary what information to send to the endocrine system, and the endocrine system, or the pituitary, releases the hounds, and the endocrine system goes to work. Speaking of hounds, oxytocin. I don't know, when Mr. Woodard was talking about oxytocin being the love hormone and the hug hormone, but also the hormone that causes aggression, I thought German Shepherd. I can't think of a good mnemonic device to link oxytocin, the term, to German Shepherd. But if you've ever been around a German Shepherd, that can be the sweetest type of dog in the world. They will, babies can crawl over them, and they love their family, and they're just kind of hanging out with the family, but then somebody knocks on the door, and the German Shepherd doesn't want them at the door. That can be a very vicious animal. So oxytocin is kind of like the German Shepherd of the hormones. I don't know, that just came to mind. All right. Let's look at some other glands and some other hormones. First of all, the pineal gland. This releases melatonin. We'll talk about melatonin in a later chapter to a greater extent. Melatonin is the hormone that regulates sleep. And one of the interesting facets of melatonin is that your melatonin as teenagers fires at a different times than an adult's melatonin. Again, we'll talk about that later on, but melatonin, you often hear of people taking melatonin supplements, especially when they're traveling, to avoid jet lag and other travel fatigue. Melatonin and pineal gland, I don't know. I was thinking of a pinwheel, and a pinwheel, if you watch a pinwheel long enough, it kind of like put you to sleep. It's kind of like a hypnosis type of thing. So maybe that's a good mnemonic device. I'm not sure. Adrenal glands. This one's an easy one to link to their hormone because adrenal and adrenaline. Adrenaline and cortisol are the two main stress hormones. So if you can remember that cortisol is a stress hormone, then you can remember that that is released by the adrenal gland, as is adrenaline. Testes and ovaries are going to be the glands that release the sex hormones. We've got the testosterone and estrogen. They're called the sex hormones because they are dominant in one of the, in either the male or the female. All males and all females have both testosterone and estrogen, but the levels are just different depending on your sex. Thyroid is going to regulate metabolism. Metabolism actually is going to be something I'm going to talk about in the next few slides. Just remember that metabolism is the chemical reactions that are in the body. We generally hear about metabolism's primary function, or we hear it the most often when we talk about people breaking down food and converting it to energy. That's one type of metabolism in the body. So oftentimes if there's an issue with thyroxine, or if there's an issue with the thyroid gland, what will happen is those chemical reactions become imbalanced, and weight gain, sudden unexplicable weight gain, can be a symptom of that. Fatigue can be a symptom because, again, the chemical reactions in the body aren't working quite properly. And then the pancreas is going to release insulin. Insulin, of course, is the famous one having to do with diabetes. Just remember that the pancreas is the main gland that releases insulin. All right, now we move on to brain scans. So there are several different types of brain scans. We want to get in and start looking at what's going on in the brain. And so one of the earliest brain scans, was the EEG, or the electroencephalograph. And you can see there, let me move my little video up there. You can see there that this is an image of an EEG, and it is measuring the electrical activity that is going on in the brain. So you put the little electrodes on the scalp, and those electrodes are picking up the electrical activity that's going on in the brain. We are going to reference these later on as brain waves, so we can see the electrical activity, and they look like little waves on the EEG printout. There's a couple of EEGs. You might not be able to get this on the raw PowerPoint. I couldn't, but you can see EEGs of different seizures occurring. So again, EEGs are going to measure that electrical activity. Now, CT scans are going to get a little bit more specific. Now we're going to actually start to see inside of the person's head. And CTs can be taken, of course, all over the body. Many of you have probably had a CT scan before. And what this is, if you've had a CT scan, you go into this big tube type of thing, and the MRIs are like a full tube most of the time. CT scans might just be kind of like a big donut. And you go inside the big donut, and then what's happening in the big donut is that you're getting all of these different x-rays being taken at different angles of the brain. And then what it does is it takes all of those x-rays and compiles them into a unified picture like you're seeing on your screen right now. So the thing with CT scans is they're good for seeing injuries to the bone. They're also good for detecting tumors, although they might not be specific as far as some of the details of the tumor, but they can detect the tumor. And they also, you'll hear about people getting CTs in the ER quite often because they're fairly quick as far as getting the results in the ER. Well, I shouldn't say that. They take a little bit longer to get the results, but it's a quick and inexpensive first step in diagnosing something when somebody comes into the ER. So the pro is that the actual CT itself only takes a few minutes and it's less expensive. However, cons, you can't do them too often because of the radiation involved, and they can take a little while to get the results. So even though you go through the CT pretty quickly, it can take a little while to get those results back. Okay? These are also not as detailed as an MRI, which is on the next screen here. And you can see here's an example of an MRI, and you can see that it's more detailed than the CT. You can start to see things a little bit more clearly. So an MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. And this is going to start looking for soft tissues. Let's say you picked up a brain tumor in a CT scan. Now you can start to take an MRI and look more specifically. Okay, what kind of tumor is it? You can start looking at characteristics of the tumor. A lot of people have had CT scans for ligaments and tendons. You messed your knee up in a soccer game, and so you went and got an MRI because they need to see if one of the ligaments is torn or damaged in some way. Pros, you don't need any radiation for this. You get the higher soft tissue detail than in a CT, but because you're getting more detail, you're getting into a more costly procedure. This can also take at least 30 minutes. And really, I think that's kind of generous. I've heard a lot of people in an MRI machine for up to an hour, even an hour and a half. This can be very difficult because you cannot move in the big MRI machine. And the big MRI machine, if you've never been in one, it's a big tube, and it all functions on magnetic resonance. And so there's a big magnet. You have to take off earrings and all that kind of stuff because the magnet is obviously very powerful. It's a very loud machine as well. A lot of people have to have their eyes covered because it's pretty closed in there. So some of you have probably had that experience before. You can step it up a notch and go with an fMRI, which stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging. And that actually takes it's a 4D image because you add time to it. You inject a dye, and it actually can watch what's going on with the metabolic processes in the brain in real time. Okay, so that's an fMRI, which becomes, again, you can watch it as it's happening. And there's actually, this right here is a pretty darn good little video, and you can see an fMRI, or just Google fMRI and check out what that looks like. And then the last one is a PET scan. So this is positron emission tomography, which sounds really impressive, and it is. This also requires a dye, but then you can start to see the activity of tumors or other brain objects or things that are going on in the brain. So pros, it measures function, not just location. So you can start to see how like a tumor is operating in the brain. What is it doing as far as how is it messing up some of the metabolic processes that are going on in the brain. These are 3D, they're in color, but they do again require a injection of radiation, and these can be the most expensive of all of the scans. Okay, so those are the different windows on the brain, the different types of scans. Mr. Woodard might have more to add, and then I guess that's about it for 2020. We'll see you in 2021 with Mr. Woodard's first video.